Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I'm glad I got here for the end of the first talk. I thought that was fascinating, and so I'm going to try to connect some of my experience with my mom with some of what we've already heard today. I thought that was fascinating. Some of the things my mother complains about or shares with me is a lot of what we heard previously. So I think that's great. So the easiest way to start this is really to talk about the title of the book. And there it is on that slide, Being My Mom's Mom. And it came from my mom herself. Her name is Doris. And in her post-dementia life, her newfound favorite restaurant is McDonald's. I don't believe my mother had ever been to a McDonald's prior to dementia. I'm not sure why that is. And we were in line at the McDonald's, and you know, as you're becoming your parent's parent, you try to do the right thing. So of course you want them to eat healthy. So as we're in the line, she looks at me and she says, "Can I have an apple pie?" And I say, "Yes, but you must eat all your lunch first." And so the cashier bursts into laughter, and my mother looks at the cashier and says, "I used to be her mom, and now she's mine." So there you have that title. And so it turned out to be a really, cool thing. I used to always tease her and say, "One day, I'm gonna write a book about you." And she'd always say, "Who wants to read a book about me?" And as it turns out, quite a few people. So it's gone, quite well. And really, I think the reason that I decided to write the book is just really right up there. The facts and figures about Alzheimer's should scare us all, not to death, but you get the picture. And the amount of hours in the right-hand side there, that $17.7 billion that caregivers typically spend in unpaid caregiving, that should scare us to death, because I'm always afraid that we're going to just run out of money. And so I see a lot of you nodding out there as well. And so that was sort of the thing that really pushed me forward to do that. As soon as my mother was diagnosed, I started to do tons of research, mostly because the question she had, I couldn't answer. And the quote that is there, I think that Loretta has an answer for everything. But when we heard the doctor say that word, "Oh, I believe you are in the beginning stages of dementia." Silence. And then my mother looks at me and says, "That's bad, isn't it?" So Loretta's a really positive person, so I put on my happy face and I say, "Well, there are worse things." And that was her response. Other than dying, what is worse than not being able to remember anything? Now, how do you answer that? Not very easily. And so what I said to her, the only really positive thing I could come up with at that moment was simply to say, whatever comes, we are going to do this together. And I smiled, and inside, I was simply terrified. How many of you out there have been terrified? Absolutely. And so it started, the whole research and all that. And I kept asking myself, why am I in this situation? My mother was 77 years old at the time of her diagnosis. We are now in year 9. And she's doing quite well, and you'll see that as we go on. But one of the reasons that I was so shocked by my mother's diagnosis is because, as that slide says, I was lulled into complacency by my outstanding and incredible family history. The woman you see on the right there, that is my great-grandmother Lou Ray. That was her 100th birthday party. At 100, she was still looking for a man. At her birthday party, she was doing her hair and all these kinds of things. And she says, "Is Reverend so-and-so out there?" His wife had died a few years earlier. And she said, "I like them young." He was 95. So she lived by herself until she was 100. And then at 100, really fought us to, we wanted to have her move to an assisted living place. And she was very much against us, absolutely fought it all the way. And at 100, she could go around this room, say your name, who you were married to, how many kids you had, what your kids did for a living, how many times you've been married. I only been married once. And she would always point that out. She could do that until she was 106. Yeah. So, finally started to go downhill at 106, and then she died at 107. And at the time, she was the oldest resident in the District of Columbia. I am a fifth generation Washingtonian, and that picture on the right, when you are 5 generations, you get your picture in the Washington Post. So there they all are. That's my niece, my little niece, my grandmother, my sister, my mother, and then there's great grandma again. And there I am with the big glasses there in the middle and the back at her 100th birthday party. So you talk about shocking. At 77, I'm thinking to myself, you're not gonna live by yourself till you're 100? So I was unbelievably, I wasn't devastated, but I was shocked. She is, the first person to ever be diagnosed with dementia in our family. So, what to do, where to start, I really had no idea. So the whole thing about complacency, one of the really cool benefits for me about this book and sort of the results of the book is people who are a lot younger than I am have started to have that family meeting. Well, Mom, Dad, who do you want to live with, when you get old? My sister and I used to have a joke. My sister had 0 level of patience, so she used to always tease me and say, you get Mama when she gets old, which I already knew, because there would be no way that my mother and my sister could be together. So I always knew that I would be the caregiver, no matter what happened. So the complacency piece for me was always, I look back on that now and said, wow, I wish I had had that conversation. Because you ever find yourself second guessing all of the things that you do, the choices that you make? Wonder if Mama would like that. And you really don't know. So the thing that has been most gratifying for me is the fact that people have had these kinds of discussions. What do we do? What do we do next? Where do you want to go? That kind of thing. So I think that was one of the greatest failures I believe I had going in, was that we had not done those kinds of things. But I just thought we had years to go. I thought I had 30 years left before we ever had to have those kinds of things. And boy, was I wrong. So the book really is based on 6 elements, and those are the things we're going to talk about in our short time together. Forgiveness, heartbreak, patience, preparation, humor, and I'm going to hopefully leave you with some hope, because truly, no matter where you are in this process, without hope, there's not a lot that wakes us up in the morning other than these are the things that we have to do. So do those sound like 6 things that would work? Okay, cool. Let's start with maybe what some churches tell me that is the hardest for some people, and that is for forgiveness. And to be a caregiver, you really need forgiveness. How many of you would agree with that? So much goes on during the day and at night and over the months that really require that we have a lot of forgiveness in our heart, and that we can also forgive ourselves, and I'll get to that in a minute. And there were a lot of things that in my life I really needed. And there are my parents in 1949. Now, my mother had told us that there were no pictures of their wedding, but as you can see, there's at least one. So I thought that was a little unusual. And then the middle picture there, that is me in 1959. Wasn't that cute? And what's really cool about that picture is one of the first ones, I guess, that my parents had taken of me. But the most interesting thing about that is when I was born in 1959, I was born several months early, accidentally, and was born at home. My mother thought she had indigestion, and when she realized it was actually labor, I was out. So the only people there were my mother and my father. I was born in a blizzard, which is also pretty cool. And after the blizzard was over, my father went to the store to get bread and milk and never came back. So I spent most of my life, teenagers and into my adulthood, looking for my father and or waiting for him to come back. And he never did. The picture on the right, how many of you all have family secrets? Okay. My Aunt Franny in the picture there with my mom was the keeper of all family secrets. So in 2011, my Aunt Franny was in a manor care nursing home, and she thought she was dying. So she told me the family secret that it was my mother who had kept my father from seeing me my entire life. Pause. Devastation. When I turned 21, I got my private investigator's license so I could find my father and help my parents get a divorce. But I was also hoping, as you know, to meet him, and that never happened. He died in 1991, and we never had the chance to meet. So imagine we were in year maybe 4 or so by then, but what that meant was I had now the information that I had wanted most of my life, but I did not have the opportunity to have a conversation with my mother to ask, what were you thinking? And so people say, oh my God, do you hate your mother? Well, I hated her for maybe all of 18 minutes, and then what? I had to move on. Why? Because she can't have a conversation with her about it. And so if I hated my mother, what did that help? If I was mean to her, what would that help? She wouldn't understand, and that's so unfair to her. So I had to open the little box and throw that thing in it and move on. Was that an easy thing to do? No. Do I still want to know the answer to that question? What were you thinking? Sure. And there was a crazy reason for it, and that's all in the book, but very interesting. It made it hard at some moments to try to move on, but then again, we did that. So I'm sorry she wasn't able to have that conversation, but that's just one of the things in life that I'm never going to have. Lots of churches, when I speak, particularly at churches, lots of people ask me, would I have rather that my aunt had not told me the secret? Maybe. But here we are. And so I loved what Dr. Taylor had to say about, being a whole person. You really are. My mother's a very different person every day, and I love her every day differently. And I thought that was a fabulous takeaway, because it really is true. And I also, for this part, forgiveness really is mandatory. And so the things that my mother says on a daily basis or those kinds of things, you really have to move on from them. She doesn't live with me, and that's another story, and I'll tell you about when we get to preparation. And the reason that she doesn't live with me is that was her wishes. So when we talk about preparation, I'll tell you how that all came about. But one of the things I'd like to say to you today about forgiveness is, don't be so hard on yourself. You are doing the best you can at the time with what you have. And so as many times a day or a month that you need to forgive yourself, do so. You're absolutely doing the best you can, and that's probably some of the best advice I can give you. So that's element number 1 of the book, which is forgiveness.